The pain still hadn't eased. I lay on my side on the sofa, pulled my legs up a little, then stretched them out again. A position would feel comfortable for a few minutes. Then my abdomen would cramp again, forcing me to move. My phone was on the table in front of me. The screen had been dark for a long time. All I could hear was the steady hum of the air conditioner, with a little light coming from one corner of the room. I closed my eyes and tried to stay still. The pain eased a little, then came back. Each time it did, I thought maybe I just needed to hold out a little longer. I'd had pain before, and it had gone away. If I could get some sleep, maybe everything would be back to normal in the morning. But this time, my body wouldn't let me sleep. I sat up, leaned forward, and stayed that way for a while. The pain was still there. I stood up and walked a few steps. That didn't help either. I went back to the sofa, lay down, and before long had to sit up again. I looked toward the bedroom for a while. At first, I didn't want to wake my wife. If the pain eased in just a little while, there was no reason for the whole family to be awake because of me. But when another wave of pain came, I braced myself against the arm of the sofa and realized I didn't want to keep waiting anymore. I called my wife. She came out, looked at me, and asked if I could bear it. I shook my head and told her I thought we needed to go to the hospital. Neither of us said much after that. She went to get changed. I grabbed my phone and a few things we needed. The front door opened, then closed behind us. The kids were still asleep inside. There weren't many cars on the road. The shops along both sides of the street were closed. Lights from signs and street lamps passed across the windows one after another. I sat in the passenger seat with one hand over my abdomen, shifting my position whenever the car went over a rough patch of road. My phone was in my hand, but I didn't open it. Work, the stocks I was holding, everything I'd been thinking about all day. None of it had disappeared. It was all still somewhere in my mind. But every time the pain came, all of it moved farther away. I just wanted the car to go a little faster. When we reached the hospital, I got out of the car more slowly than usual. My wife walked beside me. The entrance was brightly lit. I could hear the wheels of hospital carts rolling across the floor. A few people were sitting in the waiting area outside. I followed the instructions I was given, answered the questions I needed to answer, and then lay down. After they gave me pain medication, I waited. The pain didn't disappear right away. It gradually eased enough for my body to relax and for me to lie still a little longer. My wife sat beside me. Sometimes we said a few words to each other. Sometimes neither of us said anything. Later, the doctor decided to admit me to the hospital for further observation. I looked at my wife. She looked back at me, and we started thinking about things at home. The kids were still there. In the morning, someone would still need to take care of them. In the end, there wasn't much to discuss. I would stay. My wife would go home once everything here was settled. A hospital bed became the place where I would spend the night. My phone was beside my pillow. Every now and then, sounds from the hospital came through a door. Footsteps in the hallway. People speaking quietly, then silence again. I closed my eyes for a while, opened them, changed position, then lay still again. The pain was still there, but it no longer made me curl up the way it had at home. Outside the window, the darkness slowly began to fade. The shapes in the room became clearer without anyone turning on another light. There were more footsteps in the hallway now. A cart rolled past the door. Then came the voices of people beginning another day. I opened my eyes, lay still for a few seconds, and looked around the room. My abdomen was still uncomfortable, but much better than before. I tried sitting up, leaned back against the bed, and picked up my phone. There were a few notifications. Some were related to work. Others came from apps I normally open every day. My finger moved across the screen. I read a few lines, then stopped. My wife asked how I was feeling. I told her I was much better. We talked a little more about the kids and the things that needed to be done at home. Then she gathered her things to leave. Before she left, she turned around and asked if I would be okay by myself. I said I would, and told her to go home to the kids. The door closed behind her. I put my phone down beside the bed and looked around the room. The severe pain from the night before was gone. My wife is no longer sitting beside me, and there was nothing I needed to do right away. A kind of empty space suddenly appeared between the steady sounds coming from the hallway. Out of habit, my hand reached for the phone again. I opened my work messages, replied to a few things I could handle quickly, then moved on to the other notifications. The stock market app was still in its usual place on the screen. All I had to do was tap it, and the market board would appear like it did every day. I opened it. The numbers were still changing. Green and red figures, trading volume. Everything was still moving across the screen. The stocks in my portfolio were still there. The market didn't know that the night before, I'd been in so much pain that I had to go to the hospital. And it didn't need to know that right now, I was sitting on a hospital bed instead of my usual chair at the office. I watched for a while. Then I turned off the screen. Not because the stock market had suddenly become unimportant to me. The money in that account was still my money. The decisions I'd made were still there. It was just that this time, the market board didn't hold my attention as long as it had on other days. I leaned back. My abdomen gave a slight twinge as I changed position. It wasn't strong, but it was enough to make the hand pulling up the blanket stop. I stayed still and waited for the feeling to pass. There had been days when I was about to turn off the computer, but after looking at the market board, I stayed a little longer. There had been evenings when I picked up my phone just to check one thing, then one thing after another appeared on the screen. When I was tired, I told myself I could rest for a while. When I was sleepy but the work wasn't finished, I pushed a little longer. If I was tired tomorrow, I could rest then. I could sleep more on the weekend. Once this was done, I'd make time for something else. Those things happened so normally that I rarely noticed them. My body woke up with me every morning. It took me to the office, sat with me in front of the screen, followed me home, then started another day with me. If I wanted to work a little longer, it was still there. If I wanted to stay up a little later, it was still there too. Until last night. I'd spent a long time on the sofa, moving from one position to another, just hoping the pain would go away so I wouldn't have to wake my wife. In the end, I still had to get up, call her, and leave the house while the kids were still asleep. I looked at the hand resting on my abdomen. The pain was so mild now that if I'd been at home, I probably would have started thinking about going back to whatever I'd left unfinished. But the hospital bed beneath me was still there. Only a few hours earlier, I hadn't even been able to lie still on my own sofa. My phone lit up with another notification. I read it, then put the phone down. Out in the hallway, a patient's family member walked past carrying a bag of food. In a nearby bed, someone was talking on the phone. A door opened, then closed. Those sounds continued one after another. And I stayed where I was. Work at the office was still going on. Emails were still being sent. Calls were still being made. The market was still moving like it did on any other trading day. At home, my wife was taking care of the kids. Everything I normally took part in every day continued to run while I was temporarily absent. My finger moved across a few screens on the phone and stopped. There wasn't really anything I needed to look at. Suddenly, I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe it was simply because I'd become so used to always having to do something. I moved the phone a little farther away. Nothing in the room changed. The sounds in the hallway were still there. The light outside the window was brighter now. I lay there with nothing pulling my attention somewhere else and tried to remember how long it had been since I'd had a morning when I wasn't rushing anywhere, didn't need to finish anything, and couldn't force my body to move any faster than it would allow. I remembered the late meals because work wasn't finished. The evenings when I'd planned to rest, but the phone was still in my hand. The days when I told myself that once things were less busy, I'd go to bed earlier, exercise more, and make time for other things. Every time, I had a reason, and almost every reason sounded perfectly reasonable at the time. There was one thing I'd never had to think about. Would my body still be ready for those plans tomorrow? I turned over slowly, pulled the pillow closer, and lay down. If someone had told me that after just one night I'd be lying here, I probably wouldn't have known what I was supposed to prepare for. The pain hadn't checked my work schedule. It hadn't waited for me to finish the things I still had left to do. The plans were all still there. But if my body couldn't keep going, I couldn't keep going with them either. That thought stayed with me as I looked up at the ceiling. I didn't know yet what I would change after leaving the hospital. Maybe once everything returned to normal, I'd get busy again. Maybe I'd forget. Maybe I'd tell myself that one more late night or one late meal wasn't a big deal. But right now, I couldn't look at last night as just another episode of pain that would pass and then let everything go back to the way it was. My phone was still beside me. I reached for it. Instead of opening the market board, I looked at the lock screen. A few new notifications sat beneath the time. I was about to put the phone down when my eyes stayed on those numbers a little longer. At home, the kids were going through another day of their lives. At the office, everyone was going through another workday. Out there, another trading session was passing too. And I was lying here. The things I'd always thought there would be time to do were still there. But would time allow me to do them?